Over the years, a lot of you have asked me whether I would recommend studying art or not. It might have to do with this video. But questions like these are not really easy to answer, as a lot of factors make things different for every single case, and I don't want to generalize my experience. Some of you might already have concluded my point of view on studying art from earlier videos. Nevertheless, I thought it might be helpful to summarize some memorable anecdotes and explain why studying art in the end was not my cup of tea. Just for the record, I will mainly focus on the stuff that I had issues with. By all means, this is not supposed to be an all-encompassing summary. I am working as a freelance artist now, and in retrospect I really don't care that much anymore about what happened. But I believe still these stories could give an insight into what it was like when I still actively studied art. I also had good times and even made great friends, but overall I decided for myself that I want to go a different direction. So how did things get started? Getting into art school. In 2012 I started studying art at a university in Germany. At the time I had several applications for different art and design schools behind me. The first rejection was clearly because I didn't know what to include in my portfolio. I had just gathered what I had done up until that point, which is a dead giveaway for most art and design schools. So after that first crushing experience, I went to numerous portfolio guidance classes, which were really eye-opening to me. Because no matter where I went, art school or design school, they all focused on the same thing. You can't do kitsch and you can't do clichés. Everything that is fun basically is forbidden, because how dare you to have fun? Art is serious, and working as a serious artist you can't have fun. You work, and work isn't fun. Some attendants of these courses were even brought to tears, as the profs told them they should quit their part-time job because art takes dedication, and with another job they wouldn't show that enough to get accepted. They were looking for things they could call innovative, something conceptual. What those terms mean exactly was of course up to the professors. Execution and appeal were usually secondary. At the end of the day it was more important that you are able to sell your art, as in tell a story to convince people that your work is meaningful and worth something. Between the lines, your ability to sell your art held more importance and got you further than the quality of your work itself. This became pretty clear when I visited one of those guidance sessions with my twin brother, and we were told that regardless of our work, if anything, only one could get in, as they wouldn't need the same person twice. We could have shown whatever, the prof thought it was unoriginal because we are twins. As I experienced it, both art and design revealed themselves to be about learning how to present and sell art, not about getting better at producing it on a technical level. Ironically, the term innovative was used so frequently in all those portfolio guidance classes that it became a cliché in and of itself. For my final attempt, I applied for design and art, each at different universities in a different city. Thanks to the guidance classes, I was prepared and only brought what was adequate. No comics or manga, no kitsch, no cliché. So nothing figurative, nothing decorative, and no landscapes, just to name a few things that German art schools have a bias against. For time reasons, my portfolio was aimed more at design than art, but I used it for both applications. Ironically, in the end I was rejected by design, but accepted in art to become a teacher. And I was actually happy with that. The university was closer and I thought it was a nice compromise, because even though doing the portfolio felt so weird and out of place, becoming a teacher at a public school at least seemed like a safe job compared to a graphic designer. And most importantly, I believed that studying art to become a teacher would focus on exactly that, the skills you need to teach art in an art class. The skills you need to be a mentor, a teacher, and a role model, if you will. Not exclusively, of course, but I thought my program would aim to prepare us for a future in schools, while giving a healthy dose of context, art history, and contemporary art. After all, I wasn't studying to become a freelancer. I already gave up on the thought that they would teach us basic skills like anatomy, because at no point did they appear to care for that, but I was still a little bit hopeful that there would be a few courses that teach us how to get better at art. Consequently, I didn't expect them to push our work towards the contemporary German art market. I believe a teacher's artwork isn't required to fit in a museum, but should reflect the teacher's skill, so future students know who they are learning from. But I was wrong. Not really Hogwarts and my first painting class. Apart from art history and didactics, the program of studying art at my uni roughly was divided into photography, painting, graphic, and sculpture. You can imagine then like the four houses in Harry Potter. Every one of these disciplines had a representative professor, but unlike Harry Potter, there was neither Dumbledore nor Snape, and also it wasn't very magical. The first house I visited was painting. I thought it was a good start because that was what interested me the most. There was no order of what specific painting courses to take, so usually you'd have students of older semesters sitting together with a few newbies like myself. In our first lesson, we watched a documentary about David Hockney, who first gained success through controversies in the 60s. One thing that stuck out to me in this documentary was that he drastically changed his opinion on the superiority of photography over painting, or vice versa, many times. Not only did he keep switching between the two, but he always made it a point to condemn whatever he wasn't practicing at the time. Nowadays, as the documentary showed, he has settled on painting again and has an assistant that brings and mixes his paints. The teacher stopped the film periodically to start a discussion, so based on what we had just seen, I got curious. How people were happy to follow his contradictory statements when he himself just trashes a medium after switching away from it. When he says, for example, that photography has failed, as out of 1 million photos taken, few are memorable, according to him, and even those are most often accidental. How could I then proceed to appreciate what a brilliant photographer he is? I perceived a lack of consistency and asked, admittedly a bit naively, how people could still take him seriously. And that was a huge mistake. As if I had just insulted their religious leader, my older colleagues started dogpiling. How dare you ask such a stupid question? You should be happy this man is still painting in his age. You can't judge anything. Because have you ever seen a Hockney original in person? You lack respect. Educate yourself before coming with crap like that. It was like a crossfire of wild accusations and assumptions, to a point I couldn't even explain my statement. And an explanation on their end was never offered as well. What a weird way to start my university career. After everyone calmed down, the teacher continued with the movie, and the rest of those 2 hours I just said nothing and waited for the lesson to end. I get that I must have come across like someone who intentionally wants to disrespect an artist, when I was just curious. How can people take such a fun and open thing as art and take it that seriously to a degree it feels like a cult? Oh, and ironically around that time Hockney himself was questioning the skills of other artists and art schools in general. Anyway, it was a sickening first impression, and we didn't paint of course, as that was something that we should do on our own at home or after class without any guidance or teachers. So I stopped visiting that class at some point, instead focusing on other disciplines. The House of Graphic. Graphic was about drawing, or rather anything that would happen on a flat paper as opposed to painting, where you create structure with thick paint. So in principle watercolor would fit the bill. But everything in those courses was focused on lino cut and etching. So if you didn't learn how to draw already for yourself at home, you wouldn't learn it here as well. Same for the sculpting courses, which always reminded me more of the kind of work Homer Simpson put together in the episode Mom and Pop Art. In some courses I would learn how to put metal plates together though. After all, regardless of what I visited, I learned it is always better to put less effort in your work than too much. As there was no one teaching us actual skills, they also weren't expecting much in that regard. Just as before, it was only about the concept. When I joined a class about self-portraits, it went like this. I visited the introductory lesson, and then we had to work alone from home, or at uni for half a year. You then watch as your initial ambition gets transformed to an innovative blob through the feedback sessions throughout the semester. It was about expression and gesture because with those it's easier to pretend there was a concept with it, compared to an accurately drawn depiction of yourself. When visiting a live drawing session, it was nowhere near to the point of learning anatomy, but only to get something, anything, on your paper. That's why there was always a time limit of 5 to 10 minutes. It was not about learning how to draw bodies, it was about expression and gestures. Which is okay if that's your thing, but everybody got pushed in that direction, with no exceptions. I got criticized so harshly every time when I showed up with something that I put effort into, but after a few years of trying to change their minds, I gave in and just handed in stains on paper for my exams. Stuff that was thrown on paper a few minutes before class always got more appreciation than something that took days or weeks of planning and work. Anyway, things were going okay then, great even in some classes, as the production of art like that was quick and easy and the assessment was often benevolent and very esoteric. But in the back of my mind I always felt like an alien. I got used to how things were done, what was expected, and I learned to deliver. But every time when we had to show our work and talk about it, I noticed how much I was interested in totally different things. This was when I started fully separating my personal art output from the things that I did for art school. In my first 4 semesters I also took a lot of photography classes, and because I wasn't forced to dumb down myself, I had the best time there. Photography had very open do what you want classes, and we even learned technical skills in them. Apart from these 3 houses so far, I also took a very special interdisciplinary sculpture class. Sculpture and art meets
computer science.
When I heard that there was a course about art and computer science, I don't know about you, but video games were the first things that crossed my mind. After all, it was presented as a course where art and computer science students would work together on projects. It would have been too good to be true, and of course it was. Things turned weird very quickly when right after getting to know each other, the professor showed us Gary Hill's Figuring Grounds, a 10-minute video of 2 guys brabbling, smacking their lips and making baby noises while wildly gesticulating. Those were some long and awkward 10 minutes. I've linked the video in the description, and I challenge you to go for the full experience without skipping ahead. Let me know in the comments how far you made it. The atmosphere among the art students was cheerful. Some enjoyed the video, and some, like myself, had just gotten used to seeing stuff like that, so they didn't really care. The computer science students showed noticeable discomfort, however. They felt pranked, and why wouldn't they? It would have been hard to explain to my parents, or even anyone I know, the content of what we saw there, and especially why we saw it, because that's something I have no clue about to this day. One of them asked how we can take art like this seriously, or rather how credibility in art is defined. That's where the discussion got personal very quickly, because remember, you can't question the authorities. It reminded me a lot of that first painting class years before, and I began siding with the computer science students. A huge argument erupted between them and the art students. Each made their case. One criticized how art has distanced itself from the people to a point no one cares anymore, or just laughed at it. I remember that I brought up how what music is gets at least somewhat democratically chosen by popularity, in contrast to what art is. That gets chosen by a few rich people and therefore is more out of touch. And the art students were justifying their positions, that it's the lack of open-mindedness or education that led the computer science crowd to feel their way, but at no point was any agreement in sight. Shit really hit the fan though when a computer science student compared the brabbling video to taking a dump in the woods and putting a flag with art on it. For the art students that went too far, and after that heavy argument the session ended. And I found myself wondering how you could have a total lack of empathy towards people who are not used to regularly seeing and praising art like this. I mean, having a few questions after watching 10 minutes of 2 bearded guys brabbling shouldn't be that unusual, should it? I felt like an alien even more. In the next weeks of collaborating, I was often embarrassed for the field I was studying. Ironically, that whole course was actually about highlighting art and how other industries like computer science could benefit from the innovative approach of artists. And it could have worked if there was just a willingness for compromise. But in the end it just ended up with the computer science students getting used by the artists to realize their artsy projects. In one last desperate attempt to unify us, the professor talked about how important art was. Something about Russian ballet dancers that gave hope during hard times and lots of other stuff she thought would be empowering. The whole hour of that speech she had something hidden underneath a cloth, and once she was done talking, she lifted that wheel to uncover half a dead pig. Well, let me know in the comments if you have had a course in school that ended with half a carcass rotting at room temperature to prove a point. Because I have. She said it was a gift for that one computer science student that had asked if poop in a forest was art, so he could throw a barbecue party with it. Obviously, that attempt didn't work the way she had planned it. And after the session, he didn't show up anymore. And just when we started to wonder where he was, he emailed all of us. He was expelled from the class and was banned from all art facilities. Apparently one art student was offended by his remarks, to the extent she didn't want to share the same room with him. In the mail he apologized for asking that infamous question about the definition of art and wished us all the best, ending on a note that as he researched he found out that there is shit that is art. It was crushing to read that mail, and it confirmed my experience that you aren't allowed to question art. But we still had to go back to our projects. I was working on that book I showed in an older video, the one that represents a picture through code. It was really a useless and dumb idea. Really simple to execute if you deal with the topic. But as my professors don't usually deal with topics outside their bubble, they swallowed every piece of it, and it was highly praised even among the professor from painting class. I talked a bit more about it in my video What Do You Do in Art School, just follow the card in the top right. Based on my experiences, studying art at university is about selling concepts, not learning how to execute them well, and that is something I recommend to consider before applying. I was constantly lying about what I genuinely felt was crap, and presented it with confidence. It was abstract enough to sound plausible, so the professors and classmates were just willing to accept it. No further questions, nothing. It would have been easy if it didn't feel so stupid. I wondered how often art has been created with the same pretense, and I had a huge problem with the credibility of art. If the focus is on selling a concept, the salesman will tell you whatever you want to hear. And with art you can make up anything you want, because how are you supposed to check, especially when you can't even question it in class? Do not talk about baselitz. So we've learned so far that trying to question the consistency of what is claimed about art or the artist gets you shut down immediately. And another curious case of that was in a painting class. A pretty rubbish work that I adapted to fit in was compared to Baselitz, and I was told to study him in order to make him a point of reference for my work. I read interviews and found that he made some very controversial and stupid remarks around that time. In one interview in particular, Baselitz said that women, despite being the majority among art students nowadays, are never actually able to be artists. In his opinion, it was proven by history, and he continued that women were never as successful in art as men in terms of money. Apart from that obviously sexist nonsense, I wondered, would I have been allowed to question the artist based on that statement in class? And if we were to take aspects of it seriously, what would that mean? If money equals impact and success, or like Baselitz put it, even constitutes an artist, then that definition would mean that the relevancy of art doesn't depend on the art itself. Rather, it depends on how much people are willing to pay for it. As a consequence, contemporary artists then have to appeal not to themselves, but to the rich, hurting their credibility as the intention becomes so obvious. So I wanted to talk about the topic, especially since my professor was female. I was curious about her perspective. And as you can guess already, immediately when I mentioned Baselitz and what he said in the interview, I got shut down by a fellow student. It wasn't appropriate to talk about issues like that. She questioned what my goal was with that question, and whether I wanted to stir the pot, implying it came across that way and I shouldn't want to be a troublemaker. And at the time, considering the reactions I got so far, every single time others or I asked unwanted questions, I stayed silent about it after all. As much as I disagree with Baselitz's statement in the interview, I still can't help but think about the connection he made between money and the value of contemporary art. Even if we are often led to believe the importance of an artwork depends on its historical impact, the importance of art goes hand in hand with its monetary value, especially when it comes to contemporary art. It has developed into, or at least shows similarity to, a stock market, where investors buy the potential next hot artwork to maybe sell it on at a higher price, or keep it as financial security. And contemporary artists probably are well aware of that fact and work towards being the next hot thing. The common person, on the other hand, has no impact on the art discourse, and under that light, it's completely understandable why someone would feel detached from what is considered art with a capital A. The reason why a white canvas, a duct tape banana, or an unmade bat is worth millions of dollars in a gallery is far more complex than just to say it's a great piece of art. And don't get me wrong, I still believe art is everything you call art. The term art is not an endorsement, but it is a category that shifts the context of whatever you want. As I see it, a toilet can be a toilet, but if you put it in the category art through an exhibition, for example, it becomes comparable to other works of art. However useful having that discussion is to have. Does it make it worth $1 million? Only if someone is willing to pay that. And if investors see a chance for profit, they may do so. The irrelevant toilet suddenly becomes the $1 million toilet. And just like the Supreme brick, it turns into something that is highly irrational. Where everybody talks about it, demand rises and the investors are proven right. The quality of art is irrelevant for the price. Considering where we are today, I believe it's pointless to argue about what is and what isn't art, because collectors with far more money will influence that discussion by buying whatever they see fit. Art can be just anything. Good, bad, important or irrelevant, valuable or worthless. Anyway, there is a lot more that I have gone through, but I feel this video is already long enough. I hope I could give you another perspective on whether or not to study art. Keep in mind, what I described is only my personal experience from studying art at one specific university in Germany. It might be totally different for you, so I always recommend going to portfolio guidance classes before you apply for any school to make sure you know what you are signing up for. Also, I have to stress that there will be a big difference between the art you produce while studying and what you will produce afterwards. I did internships at school and that work was great usually. So it might be worth pushing through even though I didn't have the strength for that. Let me know your opinion. Are you thinking about studying art or doing so right now? Have you ever experienced something similar or was it totally different? Write a comment below. Thanks so much for watching and I hope to see you next time.